Good morning, everybody. I think we're running a little late, so they're frantically gesturing over there. You know, that should get started, so let's get started. My name is Chaz Pugliese, and I'm here to talk about the inspiration I got from, not from a teacher, but from a jazz musician. And the jazz musician goes by the name of Miles Davis. Now, first of all, I'd like to very quickly, let me thank Pilgrims for sponsoring my trip here, and again, the APPI organizers for having me back to APPI. I consider myself very fortunate because as a teacher and as a trainer, is the sound okay? Yeah. I've had the chance to meet and work with some truly inspirational teachers and trainers. Obviously, I've learned a lot from each single one of them, and I continue to learn from each single one of them. I've also learned a great deal from books I've read, studies I've done, conferences I've attended, such as this one here in Lisbon. It may perhaps sound strange then if I say that by far, the one, who's had the biggest influence on me wasn't a teacher, wasn't a trainer, wasn't a writer, wasn't an author, wasn't a student, but was a jazz musician. It's this guy here. I've been interested in jazz since since I was young. A lot of hair ago. A great uncle of mine introduced me to the music of Louis Armstrong, but also Robert Johnson, but also Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, and then bebop like Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk. I actually didn't discover Miles Davis until I was 16. And truth be told, it wasn't love at first sight. I had a really hard time to warm up to his approach to music. It took me a while to try and understand, what he was trying to do, and the whole rationale behind his approach to jazz. I couldn't understand his minimalist approach to doing things. Miles wasn't into playing loud. He wasn't into playing fast. He wasn't into playing like anybody else did at that time. We're talking about 1940s. But I continued to listen on, and I even had a chance to see Miles play live twice. I can't really say I was a fan or that he was my favorite jazz musician, but I continued to listen. My interest in Miles Davis's philosophy developed in parallel with my interest in playing jazz guitar. I'm an amateur jazz musician. I've been playing for quite a few decades now, and I'm still trying to make sense out of a melody, out of a song, without being sent off to Guantanamo. In this talk, I'd like to share a few concepts I borrowed from Miles. But first, who's Miles Davis? Very, very quickly. Miles Davis was a trumpeter, band leader, composer, arranger, and he was a creative force. He was a creative leader. It was what Miles was to jazz, Hemingway was to literature, Steve Jobs was to technology, and Picasso was to art. Speaking of Picasso, it was Miles Davis was often referred to as the Picasso of jazz, which this is not something that he particularly appreciated, because one day he snapped at a journalist and said, "My name is Miles Davis. If anything, Picasso is the Miles Davis of art." He was that kind of guy. You didn't want to mess with him. Pretty much like Bob Dylan. He was a revolutionary. He was a visionary. He changed the course of jazz at least 3 or 4 times throughout his career, which spanned 4 or 5 decades. Miles died in 1991. Why Miles Davis? Well, for 3 good reasons at least. First of all, because it's the definition of the creative genius. If you think of all the traits and the characteristics that creativity researchers associate with creativity and the creative and the creator, okay, Myers had them all. He persevered. He knew how to defy the crowd. He never rested on his laurels. He was always on a quest for new things to do. He never really stopped on his quest for more creative, more innovative approaches to jazz. And he never cared about, what anybody else had to say about his music. The second reason is because I've been studying and researching creativity, and in particular, the link between creativity and motivation for the last decade or so. And in fact, I'm actually very, very pleased to see that creativity features prominently in this conference. The third reason is because I think of teaching as a problem-solving, almost a thought experiment sort of activity. As such, I like to look at so-called feeder fields, not just at applied linguistics, because they don't know much more about learning languages than we do as lowly teachers. But I like to look at fields like psychology, and why not music? So I feel Myers has given me lots of opportunities for exploring new avenues that are worth exploring, new paths that seem promising. I look at teaching as a world of possibilities. Now, what I'd like to do is, this is Miles Davis, this is a young Miles Davis. What I'd like to do is, I'd like to introduce you to one of the things. Let me tell you a little story. A very young Herbie Hancock, himself a very accomplished jazz pianist. It was then, this is back in the 50s, he was playing piano in Miles Davis's ensemble. And one day he approached the master and said, well, Miles, I feel like I'm stuck in a rut. I keep playing the same thing. I'm getting good at what I already know how to play. Can you give me some advice? And Miles famously said, let me see if I could do a Miles Davis's impersonation. Miles talked with a raspy, throaty whisper as a result of an operation. He had surgery on his vocal cords. This is what he said. Don't play the butter notes. By which he meant, don't play what you already know how to play. Stick your neck out. Take risks. Develop a vision. Find your voice. As a teacher, this has made me think of the importance of experimenting and use creativity to provide the students with an element of surprise. In fact, I consider one of my greatest challenges as a teacher, as a trainer, as a materials designer, to come up with exercises that incorporate effective pedagogic surprises. I underscore effective and I underscore pedagogic. Because you don't want to shock your students, you want to surprise them. But that surprise, has to be framed within a solid theoretical rationale. For this, I have to be ready to take risks. For this, I have to be ready to embrace risks, knowing that I'm going to fall. Neuroscientists tell us that we process a great deal more information than we used to. According to Daniel Levitin, who's a neuroscientist at Harvard University, the average American is exposed to the equivalent of 174 newspapers on a daily basis. This is huge. One of the consequences is that it's become increasingly harder to stay focused on the task at hand. So, when I'm in class, I'm fully aware that if my students are not paying attention to me, I shouldn't take it personally, because the students, it's not as if, they're not paying attention full stop. They're paying attention to something else. And so I'm fully aware that I've entered a battle of stimuli, if you know what I mean. So they may not be paying attention to me, but that's because they're paying attention to something else. And so the need, this is where the need for surprising them originates. Certainly, surprising the students involves taking risks. It's a very high risk affair. But so is not taking risks. So is using a book. So is doing the same old stuff that we've been doing every day. And that risk is called routine, which leads to boredom. And I don't know about you. I don't actually think that boredom, whatever some philosophers may think about this, it may be a very interesting existential condition, but in the classroom, boredom, for me, it's no. Now, Miles practiced what he preached. It wasn't very, it's not as if, he was good at dispensing advice. Don't play the batter notes or stuff like that. No, he really walked the talk. One day, a journalist asked him, how come it stopped playing ballads? You know what a ballad is? A ballad is a slow song, okay? And Miles famously said, because I love them too much. And so this basically implies the need of, looking out and see and do something that you're not good at doing. And so that's what I mean, by embracing risk. It's the essence of development, if you think about it. Okay? So being on a quest for something. This is another one of his famous pearls of wisdom. I'll play it first, then I'll tell you what it is. Miles taught me about improvisation. You may know that jazz is improvised music. Excuse me. What does improvisation mean? Well, when you improvise, you're composing and you're performing music at the same time. It's a very challenging endeavor. But it's not chaos. Or, if you prefer, it's disorganized order. Or maybe organized chaos. I don't know. Musicians have an agenda. There's a melody to respect. There is a harmonic structure to play within. You can't just do anything. Other people are listening. Your bandmates are listening to you. Everybody's listening to each other. The music then originates and is fueled by the interaction between the musicians and also the interaction with the public. Working without a script, working without an agenda, forces you to listen intensely to ensure that your contribution is contextually relevant. I find this concept fascinating. And I'm sure I see a few heads nodding. And this is where I look at how I look at teaching. I may have a lesson plan. I may have a very loose lesson plan. But then, I also want to feel free to move and, and explore whatever it is that seems worth exploring and being in the here and now. That's the essence of improvisation. As a teacher, I do need some sort of structure, but I also have to keep an eye on what's going on between the students within the group and be reactive. In other words, it's the people you're with that should dictate the lesson, the agenda, and that's pretty much what jazz musicians do. I want to show you a couple of examples now, practical examples. This is a talk, but I'd like to give you a few ideas, a few examples of how perhaps these principles could be used in class. Or that's my interpretation of these of Miles' theory, basically. For the first exercise, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen. Okay, I'm going to dictate a very short note that Marcel Proust wrote to one of one of his friends. It's in English. It's not perfect English, as you will see. Okay, this is it. Ready? Dear Madam, I forgot my cane at your house yesterday. Period. Kindly give it to the bearer of this note. So, dear Madam, I forgot my cane at your house yesterday. Kindly give it to the bearer of this note. Marcel Proust. Now, there is a postscriptum below, but I'm not going to give it to you. Can you turn to your partner? Can you try and write down as many postscriptums as you can? What do you think Marcel Proust's postscriptum was? Okay? Can I give you 2 minutes? Can you do it in 2 minutes? Okay? You have a few? Yeah? How do you think the woman felt when she received this note, when she read the note? How did she feel? How would you feel? Sorry? Depends what had happened the previous night with Marcel Proust. He was gay. Yeah? Any contribution? Possibility. Can you say Can you say more? Uh-huh.
And she is the bearer of Marcel Proust's cane. Can he walk without it?
Oh gosh, you're going beyond the exercise. That's great. That's fabulous. Okay, this is what Marcel Proust wrote. Kindly pardon me for writing this note. I just found my cane. It's a true story, actually. Now, I want to share with you some of the. Obviously, this is an exercise I do with my students. I want to share with you a few postscripta that my students wrote. Number one, dear MP, was your note supposed to be funny? These are C1s, by the way. To me, it just means there's something wrong with you, respectfully. Number two, sorry, I don't understand your note. Don't you have anything better to do than write such nonsense? And number three, which is my favorite, yo, Proust, you rock. How's that for creativity? Yeah. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. Okay. This is something else that Miles said once, which encapsulates, his approach to music. Miles Davis was a very flamboyant, eccentric individual. He wore, very wild clothes. He drove a yellow Ferrari he was the only one to actually drive a yellow Ferrari in the streets of Manhattan back in the 60s. So he was African American, so you can imagine. Okay, so, and he bragged about it, to no end. Okay, so he was really proud. So he was a very egotistic kind of individual. I mean, you didn't really want to mess with him. As a human being, he wasn't that nice, actually. Okay, but we're not worried about that. But for all his eccentricity, okay, he had a very frugal, economical approach to music. It was, as I said before, he wasn't into playing too many notes. He wasn't into playing loud. His whole philosophy is 3 notes. You gotta be able to tell a story with 3 notes. Okay, that really was what it was all about. No frills, minimalist approach to music. He wasn't into playing loud like Louis Armstrong used to do, for example. And he didn't play like any of his contemporaries. He wasn't into speed. He was some kind of antilitteram dogme, maybe, very minimalist, okay? He still needed instruments, okay? He electrified everything. So he wasn't a dogme kind of guy, okay? But he had a very economical, frugal approach to music. Miles called this radical simplicity, which doesn't mean dumbing things down. In fact, quite the contrary. It's actually very complex. And a lot of creativity researchers say that simplicity is the ultimate test. Because when you don't have much, this is where you have to be able to squeeze your brains real hard and come up with something new. Something new and valuable, not something new and that's it. It's got to be original and valuable. So this is the thing. Now, if we transfer all this, to our classrooms, I'd say at the outset, I have nothing against using books. I have nothing against using technology. Nikki gave us a wonderful talk yesterday. She showed us, what we could do with mobile technology. I have nothing against that. I don't think, in teaching, I don't think anybody could be dogmatic, which is what I've just said is dogmatic in a sense. But you know what I mean. I think it's wrong. I think, I believe, as I said, I believe in possibilities. But I also think, that Miles knew what Leonardo da Vinci used to say. Leonardo da Vinci called simplicity. Maybe I have a quote here, or maybe not. Oh, I'm going the other way around. Oh, okay. This is what Leonardo da Vinci. I don't know if Miles knew about this, but he must have known about that. So I want to give you a couple of examples of my interpretation of simplicity in the classroom. Simplicity also happens to be one of the strategies, one of the creativity strategies that I talk about when we deal with creativity. I think it's the first step into the creative process. So Professor Graves yesterday was talking about the constraints. So operating within certain constraints should fuel your creativity because you don't have any books, you don't have anything. You just have the group. The people, which is a lot. But you have to be able to take risks. You have to be able to basically lose face. You have to embrace the risk that, that what you're trying out with the students might not work. They might hate it. Okay? You might be able to accept the fact that, that you may not be supported by the environment, in which case, being creative is much harder. And so you're not going to do it. So there is a lot. But simplicity per se is a very good place to start. Because, you focus not so much on the materials anymore, but you focus on the people. So Miles wasn't focusing on virtuosity. He wasn't focusing on speed. It was focusing on the music, on the interaction. Okay? I'll give you an example. One of the things that he did. It's very famous, actually. There's a record that Miles did in 1956, which is one of the most iconic records ever made in the history of jazz music. That record is called Kind of Blue. And normally when a musician a leader wants to make a record, okay, what he does, or she, what they do is, they talk to people, they find the musicians, okay, they get them on the phone, they talk, they rehearse the music, and everybody knows what to play, okay, and then, they rendezvous in a studio downtown and make the record. Well, Miles didn't do things that way. For Kind of Blue, what Miles did was he picked the musicians he wanted to work with, okay, and then he left them in the dark. The only thing he told them was, okay, I'll meet you downtown at such and such studio, okay, on such and such day, okay, be there. Musicians knew nothing about the music. So first time musicians, look at the music is in the studio. And guess what happened? What happened was, considered to be, one of the true masterpieces in the history of jazz. Kind of Blue is perhaps, if you never bought any jazz records, this is it. Okay? So why did he do it that way? Well, this is also part of simplicity. Because Miles said, well, I didn't want to bias them. I didn't want them to, I wanted to keep everything fresh. I wanted everybody to have a fresh approach to music. Okay? I wanted to keep it simple. So no music scores, no chords, no, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, no. It was just, 4 or 5 musicians in a studio, okay, recording, and they actually, to conclude the story, they were all first takes except for one. They recorded 6 or 7 songs, I can't remember, and they were all first takes. And the music reached unprecedented heights. Okay, so this is the kind of creative leader that he was, but he couldn't have done it if he had looked at music in a different way. So simplicity really worked for him. Now, let's see if it works for me. Okay, I want to give you a couple of examples to show you how simplicity works in my classroom. The first one is you don't need to write, but you need to close your eyes. Okay, I'm going to give you a poem. I'm going to read you a poem line by line. And I'll stop at the end of each line, and I'll give you some instructions. Okay, close your eyes and make sure you feel comfortable in your seat. Don't cross your legs if that's possible. Ready? I write. Now, can you visualize the word? Can you see the words? Where are they? Are they above your head? Are they in front of you? Are they behind you? Perhaps they're hanging from the ceiling. Are they in capital letters? Black ink? Blue? I write. Now, when I snap my fingers, okay, I'd like you to give it back to me, okay, imitating my tone of voice, please. I write. Okay, don't be so shy. Only because. Now, visualize the words. Only because. Where are the words? There is a voice. There is a voice. Visualize the words. Capital letters. Within me, visualize the words. Hear yourself say those words, play them in your head, and then when I snap my fingers, give them back to me. That will not. Be still. Be still. Visualize the words. Okay, now, can you get out a piece of paper and see, if you can remember the poem? Write it down. Okay, I read it out without stopping this time, and you can check in if you have everything down. Okay, I write only because there is a voice within me that will not be still. Is that what you have? Good. Now, all I have here is a poem written by Sylvia Plath, by the way. All I've done is I guided you through a visual exercise. Okay, so this works for some people who like to see words. Okay, so if you spell, do you spell like this? Do you air finger things? Okay, it doesn't mean that you're a visual learner, by the way, but it does mean that you like to see things, maybe. Yeah. So this is an exercise that you could do with any poem, in fact. Okay, I want to give you another one. You still need to write. I'm sorry, and I'll dictate. This is a very short. It's a very short story by David Forster Wallace. Ready? 2 young fish were swimming in the ocean. 2 young fish were swimming in the ocean. As they swam past an old fish, he said, 2 young fish were swimming in the ocean. Period. As they swam past an old fish, he said, as they swam past an old fish, he said, "Hi guys, how's the water?" So 2 young fish were swimming in the ocean. As they swam past an old fish, he said, "Hi guys, how's the water?" The 2 young fish continued on for quite a while, and then one finally said, "What the heck is water?" So I'll read it again. 2 young fish were swimming in the ocean. As they swam past an old fish, he said, "Hi guys, how's the water?" The 2 young fish continued on for quite a while, and then one finally said, "What the heck is water?" What I'd like you to do is, with your partner, okay, can you rewrite the story, okay, without messing with the meaning, okay, but without using the letter I. You can change anything you want to, but you're not allowed to use the letter I. So you can't say fish and you can't say swim. Can I give you, how much time you need for this? 3 minutes? Okay? Okay. I know you need more time, but this is, I just wanted to give you a taste. I didn't invent this technique. This is called the Lipogram. I learned this from my very good friend Mario Rimbolukri, who learned it from a Greek writer called Trifiodoros. Trifiodoros, a couple of thousand years ago, he wrote a book. Lipogram, incidentally, doesn't have anything to do with your cholesterol reading. Okay, so a lipogram was invented by Trifiodoros. Trifiodoros apparently wrote 23 books, each skipping one letter of the alphabet. And apparently they all made sense. I haven't read any of them. But this is a technique used also by the Oulipo writers in France. I don't know if you're familiar with a French writer called Georges Perec. He wrote a couple of books, skipping also, other people as well. Skipping one of the... Now, this is a very challenging exercise. I don't know what you think, but I'd love to hear back from you. It's a very challenging exercise because you're pushing the students to manipulate the language. Sometimes, you have to change the verb from active into passive or vice versa. Okay, you can't say fish, so you have to come up, with a lexical equivalent and so on and so forth. So it's pretty challenging, but then I want to challenge my students. If my students are not challenged, they're bored. Okay, so it's still simple because all I'm using is 4 lines of text. Okay, and the rest is done by the students. There's a lot more that you could do with this. Okay, but I'm sure your ideas are better than mine, so we're not going to go into that. So that's what I mean by simplicity, basically. Okay, now this is simplicity combined, with another creativity strategy, which is combinational or association. When what you do is, you take somebody else's creativity and you blend it with yours. So I didn't have to write that text. I didn't write the poem that I gave you before, but what I'm doing is, I'm using somebody else's creativity. I'm piggybacking on somebody else's creativity and come up with an exercise. Okay, so that's called in creativity research. That's called association or combinational creativity. Okay, so I'm blending 2 strategies together, and that's what Myers didn't invent jazz. Nobody really knows who invented jazz. And nobody really cares. I don't think. Okay, but what he's doing is he's using what's out there. Okay, and reframe everything to suit his own a vision of what jazz music, is supposed to sound like. Okay? And so I guess, mutatis mutandis, in my little realm, I'm trying to do the same thing. Okay? I want to give you one last exercise to illustrate how surprise works in class. Now, I'm very big on surprise. As I said before, I think, that students need to be surprised. There was a really interesting survey in England a couple of years ago. 750 students were asked to mention the top characteristics of a teacher, and guess what came on top? The first trait, the first thing that they, originality. Originality is another word for novelty, which is another word for creativity. So a creative teacher is such only when he or she comes up, with something that's surprising. In the sense, ooh, we've never done this before. I better prick up my ears and listen. I want to do this. I've never done it before. I want to go down that avenue. Okay? This is the kind of response that we have to trigger in our students if we want them to listen and pay attention. Remember that attention is a big deal these days. Okay? So, and that's the thing. So this is the exercise I like. You need to write, okay? So you can relax. I'm going to give you a first line of a story, okay? And then I'm going to invite yes/no questions, okay? So this is the story. I live in Paris, and one sunny day, I remember going to the market, as I usually do, and on the way back, I bought a newspaper, and I sat on my neighborhood cafe to drink a cup of coffee, which is something I actually never do on a Sunday morning. Okay? That's the beginning of the story. Can you fire yes/no questions? No. Alone. No. No. Yes, no. Sorry? Yes. Was I looking for specific information in the newspaper? Yes. Was I alone? No. Come on. Was I? Unemployed. Yes. I was unemployed. Yes, I was looking for a job. Yes, I was looking for a job as an English teacher. Okay, let me give you another line now. 2 tables down from me, there was a young woman, okay, with a scowl on her face. Questions?
Were you in love?
Say it again?
Were you in love?
No. Was I in love? No. Say it again? Yes.
Were you attracted in some way by this woman?
Yes. I was attracted in some way by this woman, but I wasn't in love with her. Okay. Can I ask you to see, if you can imagine how the story unfolds? Okay. Can I give you one minute and a half? Is that enough? And then I promise I'll tell you what the story was. Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm a little worried about time. This is the story. 2 tables down from me, there was this young woman with a scowl on her face and a huge suitcase standing right next to her. It was obvious, that she'd been crying. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. She looked at me, but she was minding her own business. I'm minding my own business. So I read the paper. I was drinking coffee. We made eye contact, once or twice, and then at some point, an old man was walking by the cafe, and we were sitting outside, by the way, and he looked at her, and he walks up to her, and he said, Ne vous inquiétez pas. Ça va tout s'arranger. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. That's all he said, and then he walked away. And I was really moved. I considered that an incredible act of love. From a stranger to, obviously they didn't know each other. Okay, from a stranger to a stranger. And I also even hated myself for thinking, oh, he's gonna ask for money or something like that, because he was wearing ragged clothes and stuff. And I could kick myself even today. That's all he said. Don't worry, with a smile on his face. Don't worry, everything will be all right. But he knew nothing what she was going through. But obviously, her face spoke volumes. Okay, so that's a story. So how was I dealing with your questions? Did you notice anything strange? Yes. So if your question ended with a vowel, I answered no. If your questions ended with a consonant, I answered yes. Sometimes I don't even have a story. Sometimes, and this is the fun of it. This is a surprising bit. So the students, build up a story as we go along. But now, if you think it's a very old trick, but if you think about it, there's a lot of language involved. There's a lot of skills. And that's what improvisation is all about, and that's what simplicity is all about. Does that make sense? Yeah? So, to conclude, Mises' music and his approach to music opened up a world of possibilities. Possibilities really is a key word. I'd like to argue here that a school based on possibility and not diktats is perhaps what we need. A school in which teachers are free to use their imagination and explore possibilities. I'd like to finish with a poem by the great Polish writer Wisława Szymborska, Nobel Prize, a few years back. A poem is called Possibilities. I prefer movies. I prefer cats. I prefer the oaks along the Warta. I prefer Dickens to Dostoevsky. I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. I prefer keeping a needle and a thread on hand, just in case. I prefer the color green. I prefer not to maintain that reason is to blame for everything. I prefer exceptions. I prefer to leave early. I prefer talking to doctors about something else. I prefer the absurdity of writing poems to the absurdity of not writing poems. I prefer, where love's concerned, non-specific anniversaries that can be celebrated every day. I prefer moralists who promise me nothing. I prefer cunning kindness to the over-trustful kind. I prefer the earth in civis. I prefer conquered to conquering countries. I prefer the hell of chaos to the hell of order. I prefer Grimm's fairy tales to the newspaper's front pages. I prefer leaves without flowers to flowers without leaves. I prefer dogs with uncropped tails. I prefer light eyes, since mine are dark. I prefer desk drawers. I prefer many things that I haven't mentioned here to many things I've also left unsaid. I prefer zeros on the loose to those lined up behind the cipher. I prefer the time of insects to the time of stars. I prefer to knock on wood. I prefer not to ask how much longer and when. I prefer keeping in mind even the possibility that existence has its own reason for being. So this is possibilities, and that's what teaching should be about, if you ask me. Thank you so much.